This week we are talking about freight costs, and I'm going to share with you seven ways to reduce your freight costs, and we're talking road freight coming right up. So this week we're talking about reducing freight costs, road freight costs, and it's probably one of the things we get asked most frequently at Logistics Bureau, which is my day job, running a consulting company. And people are always trying to save money on freight costs. So let me give you 7 simple tips that you can use to have a look at your own freight spend and try to reduce the cost. So number 1, capacity utilization. So this would apply probably more so with an in-house fleet or a dedicated fleet. So actually look at the carrying capacity of the vehicles and see, are you utilizing them? So for example, you might have a third-party carrier where you're paying a full truck rate for deliveries, but the truck isn't traveling full all the time. Or you might have an in-house fleet where you're really only utilizing 50 or 60% of the space in the vehicles. So that's a very simple check. So just have a look at the type of vehicles you're using and are you actually using their full capacity. Next one is volume leveraging. So I see this a lot, particularly with larger businesses who maybe have multiple sites, multiple divisions. You really ought to be using that volume, that price leveraging to talk to carriers and try to get a better rate. I mean, if you're saying to them, for example, I want you to move 10,000 pallets of product a month, but actually collectively across the business you've got 30,000 pallets a month, they're probably going to be able to offer you a better rate per pallet because it's a bigger volume, it's giving them more business. So always look at volume leveraging. So next one, dedicated fleet or not. So what do I mean by dedicated fleet? So maybe the transport company is providing you 10, 100 vehicles just for your use, rather than you just hiring the vehicles from them as needed or just paying a pallet rate or a load rate or whatever. Sometimes it can make a lot of sense. I would suggest where the vehicles are very heavily utilized in terms of time and carrying capacity, it can make sense to have dedicated vehicles. So do have a look at that and make sure you're not paying over the top for some vehicles that you're not really utilizing well enough or all of the time. Now, the next one is going to be the one that everybody targets, and it's the rate. The rate per whatever it is, the dollars per ton, the pounds per cubic meter, the dollars per truckload, whatever that might be, the actual rate, the dollars that you're paying for that unit rate. Everybody focuses on that. And look, it's okay to do a little bit of benchmarking, but you have to recognize that transport is a very low margin business. And so if you're going to a transport company and saying, hey, look, for local delivery, I no longer want to pay $20 a pallet delivered. I reckon you ought to be doing it for 18. You're squeezing and squeezing. There's not a lot to squeeze out of that lemon. So the next one is probably going to be far more beneficial for you, and that is the rate type. Okay, so rather than attack the actual dollar rate that you're paying, have a look at the type of rate that you're paying. And what do I mean by that? Are you paying a dollar per ton, dollar per pallet, dollar per delivery, dollar per truckload? Whatever that rate type is, have a look at that and see if that's driving the right behaviors and if it fits your delivery profile. So for example, why would you be paying a truckload rate? So let's say you've got a truck that carries 12 pallets and you're paying a certain amount regardless of how many pallets are on that truck. Do you think that's encouraging the transport company to make sure that truck's well utilized and going out full all the time? Probably not. So have a look at the way that you're paying for the service, the rate type, and make sure that that's actually driving the right behaviors. Another one that is so common, particularly in areas where deliveries are taking place over a vast geographic region. So I'm based in Australia. It's quite difficult getting national distribution done in Australia because it's such a vast country. US would be the same, Europe would be the same. And what I see is very common is they have way too many transport providers, way too many carriers, and 200 is not uncommon. I'd love to hear down below. I mean, if you're operating in one of those larger geographic regions like Europe and the US, do companies have many different transport carriers? The reason they do it here in Australia is that a lot of the carriers are sort of regionally based. You know, they might be very good at delivering into regional areas or city areas or different states. And people use that as a little bit of an excuse. And over time, you know, the local branches of a business will have their relationships with different carriers. And before you know it, in a big business, you've got 200 carriers. Why is that not a good thing? Well, just think of the administration in actually managing that many carriers and checking invoices and all that kind of stuff. And going back to one of my earlier points, the volume leveraging, you're probably not getting the best rates, are you, if you're splitting up that transport task across so many different carriers. So have a look at how many you're using. I'm not suggesting you're going to get it down to one. The geography may not allow that, and you've probably also got different levels of service. You might have general carriers and express carriers and air freight carriers and so on. But 200, that's a bit too many. So have a look and see if you can maybe get it down to half a dozen. And then finally, reducing freight costs. I would include routing. Depending what part of the world you're in, you might call it routing or routing, but basically the planning task for multi-drop deliveries, particularly multi-drop deliveries. So whether that is a third-party carrier or your own fleet, if you're not using systems to help you better manage and utilize that fleet in a multi-drop environment, you probably ought to have a look. So I'm talking about, you know, maybe you've got a fleet of 10 or more vehicles and they might be doing 30 or 40 drops a day. That's quite a complex task to manage efficiently without system support. And what I'm talking about there is routing and scheduling systems. They use something that was developed many years ago called the traveling salesman algorithm. They basically work out what is the shortest path to do all of these deliveries and therefore travel the least distance in the least time, do it more efficiently and cheaper. So those sorts of systems are really good. And if you have quite a complicated multi-drop delivery operation going on like that, and you haven't used a routing system, you can probably expect to save 10 or 15% on your transport costs by using one. So I've done this with consulting clients dozens, probably hundreds of times over the last 25 years. And it's a really effective way to reduce your freight costs. Okay, so there we go. We had quite a few. Let's just run through them. It was capacity utilization, volume leveraging, dedicated fleet or not, the rate that you're paying, and then the rate type, having too many carriers, and using routing systems. So there you go. Whatever suits your particular freight operation, there'll be some things there that you can have a look at to see if you can reduce your freight costs. And by all means, if you've got any other tips, share them down below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.